Tom Cameron Swayze.
Brett Huntley. David Brainerd. John Chancellor.
Tom Brokaw.
Tonight, the gathering storm, Tropical Storm Rita, gaining strength and heading for the Florida Keys, and new fears tonight that Louisiana could soon be in its path. Change of plans. The people of New Orleans trickling back home are now told not so fast. Don't come back just yet. North Korea's nukes. After a long standoff with the U.S., a possible deal to end North Korea's nuclear program. But can it be trusted? And clean cut. With his small shears and a big heart, this barber gives the most important haircuts of his life to survivors of Katrina.
NBC News World Headquarters in New York. This is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. We have another potential problem tonight on top of all the suffering of the last several weeks. The Gulf Coast, after all, was hit 3 weeks ago today, and tonight there is a new storm on a worrisome course. Here is the very latest tonight. The approaching storm is Rita, already striking the Florida Keys, where we'll get the latest in just a moment. In New Orleans, a public feud between officials, and tonight their policy of letting people return to their homes and businesses is off. And the question of cost still lingers. Tonight we'll have a look at who pays for all of this. We once again have all angles of this story covered this evening, beginning with the projected path of this new storm, which is a very tricky business. We're going to start off with meteorologist Bill Cairns of our digital weather channel, NBC Weather Plus. And Bill, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Unfortunately, New Orleans and the entire Texas coast are still in Rita's potential strike zone. But right now, she's Florida's problem. Rita continues to grow rapidly tonight. The storm's holding steady on a tight path, which will take Rita dangerously close to Miami. Northerly turn would mean, at a minimum, extremely heavy rain and a possible storm surge that once again could overwhelm that broken city. Brian?
And that's the problem, as we'll get to next. Bill Cairns, thank you. Now to the most immediate danger from Rita, the Florida Keys, where again, because this storm came up so quickly, there's skepticism over its potential threat. NBC's Mark Potter is in Key West for us tonight. Mark, good evening to you.
And good evening, Brian. Here in Key West and elsewhere in the Florida Keys, they are boarding up and moving out. Obeying a mandatory evacuation order for the Florida Keys, streams of cars headed north on US 1 trying to beat the storm. In downtown Key West, and even here with the storm heading this way, residents are worried about where the storm heads next after it leaves Key West and enters the Gulf of Mexico. Brian?
Thanks, Mark. Mark Potter in Key West tonight. And even though Rita hasn't even hit yet, and with it still a tropical storm, there was fallout earlier today. Crude oil prices surged $4.39 to more than $67 a barrel. That's the biggest one-day price jump ever, amid worries that Rita could hit already battered oil rigs in the Gulf later on this week. And now to the big story out of New Orleans, as we said, where some residents and business owners began to trickle back there today, only to be told this afternoon that the policy had changed. They should not come back just yet. That course correction from the mayor of New Orleans, the same mayor who just a few days ago had invited people to return. We're joined now by NBC's Kevin Tibbles in New Orleans. Kevin, good evening.
Brian, after a weekend of open debate about the wisdom of inviting people back to New Orleans, the advance of another storm now has everyone, including the mayor, in agreement that people should stay out of here for a while.
I'd rather err on the side of conservatism so that we make sure that we have everybody out.
Mayor Ray Nagin says if Rita hits New Orleans, the city's pumping stations will simply not be able to handle the rush of water.
We are suspending all re-entry into the city of New Orleans as of this moment.
At the White House, the president was even more blunt, laying out a worst-case scenario.
If it were to rain a lot, there is concern from the Army Corps of Engineers that the levees might break.
But in the Algiers neighborhood, where residents had already started to come back today,
Good to be home.
there were visible signs that even with
mandatory evacuation, and I do believe that 100% of the people will listen this time.
Tonight, all those residents who listened to their mayor and came back home may now have to pack up and move out of here again as early as Wednesday. Brian?
Thank you, Kevin. NBC's Kevin Tibbles in New Orleans again tonight. And now to the troubling issue of how to pay for it all. Where do those taxpayer dollars come from? Hundreds of billions of them. Here is NBC News Chief White House correspondent David Gregory.
The true cost of Katrina is only beginning to sink in. A $200 billion estimate at least for reconstruction, much of it to be paid by taxpayers. That's on top of the roughly $200 billion taxpayers have already spent in Iraq to date. Conservatives are getting fed up, openly complaining about the return of big government under George W. Bush. These days, and the recent NBC News Wall Street Journal poll found that Americans rank the deficit. Gregory, NBC News, the White House.
Now to how Americans, the taxpayers themselves, are feeling about the question of who should pay for all this recovery and how. NBC's Mike Taibbi is in Oklahoma with some heartfelt answers from the American heartland.
Good morning.
In News, Stroud, Oklahoma.
Up next here this Monday night, NBC News In Depth, our special series on Katrina's evacuees. Will they go back or start new lives far from their old ones? And more on Katrina later, when a simple haircut becomes a gesture that means so much more.
Only on Today, an extraordinary event live on the plaza. We're going to build new homes and send them to replace those destroyed by Katrina. So join the Today Show, Habitat for Humanity, and Warner Music Group, and make a difference today. Only on NBC.
Officials prepare to reopen New Orleans, but Joe wants to know, is the city really ready or...
NBC News In Depth tonight, a special series of reports here on all those people displaced by this storm and now living scattered about in all 50 states. Tonight, NBC's Dawn Fratangelo has the story of one New Orleans family finding refuge in the Northeast, trying to figure out what to do with their lives in a home away from home.
Fratangelo, NBC News, Pittsfield, Massachusetts.
And up next here, the news that North Korea promises to give up its nuclear weapons program in exchange for aid. Will they keep that promise?
Battle insurance companies, NBC Nightly News tomorrow.
Word from Beijing tonight that we can report what appears to be an extraordinary turning point in the standoff between the U.S. and North Korea over nuclear weapons. We get details now from NBC's Jim Miklaszewski at the Pentagon.
After 2 years of talks and standoffs, negotiators working to defuse North Korea's nuclear crisis finally had something to celebrate. No, either way. Jim Miklaszewski, NBC News, the Pentagon.
It was the extravagant spending, the stealing, and lying to shareholders that got former Tyco CEO Dennis Kozlowski in trouble. And today, here in New York, Kozlowski was sentenced to prison as long as 25 years, though he could be released after 8 1/3. The judge also ordered Kozlowski to pay nearly $170 million in restitution and fines. It was a down day on Wall Street. The Dow off more than 84 points, NASDAQ down more than 15. And we have an update tonight on a story many of you asked about, those 8 dolphins washed out to sea during the hurricane. They were all found alive and huddled together in the water last week near their old home in Gulfport, Mississippi. 4 of them have now been rescued and are back in captivity, but the other 4 weren't in their usual spot yesterday or today, the spot where the trainers have been feeding them each day. They will keep looking. We will keep you posted. When we come back here tonight, one man's theory that if you look good, you'll feel better, and that applies to survivors of Katrina.
NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, brought to you in part by Aflac. Ask about it at work.
If you missed Rita Cosby live in breaks, America watches Today first.
Help me, please, can you? Please.
This is Today on NBC.
When someone's just lost everything dear to them in the world, the idea of getting a haircut may not seem like priority number 1. But a whole lot of people have just lost everything, and you know what they say about the restorative power of a haircut. Well, that is the gift that one man has chosen to give to survivors of Hurricane Katrina. NBC's Bob Fall has his story.
He is a good Samaritan with sheer news, San Antonio.
And finally tonight, with so many of the people of New Orleans without a home these days, that includes their football team. What are they supposed to do, considering tonight is their first home game of the year and their home, the Superdome, is decidedly not an option? The answer is they're going to pretend New Jersey is home. Tonight they play the Giants at Giant Stadium, but the ink in the end zone says Saints. And while there's no place like home, on this Monday night at least, there's no place like Jersey. And that is Nightly News for this Monday night. Thank you for being with us. I'm Brian Williams. We'll look for you right back here tomorrow evening. Good night.
Nightly News is a presentation of NBC News. More Americans watch NBC News than any other news organization in the world.
Next, a housewife's tragedy on a Connecticut campus as a student falls to his death. NBC 30 live in Hampton this morning with the latest on the investigation. Tomorrow, see the high-tech approach more people are turning to help quit smoking.
Tomorrow from 5 to 7 a.m. on NBC 30, Connecticut's news leader, followed by The Today Show at 7 a.m.
The new trouble brewing inside some Yukon dorms at 11.
Good morning.